Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Moore with the Consumer Technology Association, and thank you so much for joining us for Next Steps Implementing the American Innovation Agenda in 2019. Thank you so much to the Business Roundtable for pulling this great convening to talk about innovation in America. And I'm joined by two incredible guests who will help guide us through the administration and Congress's view of how we implement an innovation agenda in 2019. To my far left, I'm joined by Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri. Elected to the Senate in 2010, but a distinguished career before that, 7 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Right.
He serves on a number of different...
Nobody ever says to my far left when they introduce me.
This is true. This is true.
I'm still reveling in that.
Yeah. Senator Blunt serves on the Senate Commerce Committee, and as you may know, that is where innovation policy breathes, where it comes out, and he chairs the Aviation Subcommittee. I'm also joined by Michael Kratsios, who's the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the United States of America. Michael advises the President on a broad range of tech policy. Before joining the administration, he was a principal at Teal Capital, where he invested and advised technology companies. So let's kind of jump in. So the midterms kind of just occurred, and as I say, the American people, they shuffle the deck every 2 years, and so they dealt the Senate. Republicans a strong hand in the Senate, but they've changed the game in the House, changing leadership to the Democrats. So how does that change innovation policy for 2019? How does that change your priorities?
Yeah, I think the most optimistic view of that is that it may drive us more toward the innovation space, the infrastructure space, the workforce preparation space, and we'll have to see how that all works out. But I can see how all of those could be great areas for bipartisan cooperation. They're also all areas that the President and Michael and his team are interested in. And, you know, I think this will be one of those unique times when we really ought to need to redefine infrastructure to where it has all the infrastructure we need as we're thinking about how we need to compete, including broadband and information resources of various kinds. But I would see that, Tiffany, as a particularly good place for us to look at as a bipartisan place to start.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, most often tech policy and innovation policy is nonpartisan or bipartisan, and so some of the best bills, you were in the Congress when we did the 96 Telecom Act, which you know allowed for so much innovation to flourish. So Michael, kind of as you all approach kind of a change in Congress, how will you all approach, and as you kind of try to put together an innovation agenda in 2019?
I think first we see it as a real, almost a sense of opportunity, especially in the tech policy space. I think I'm blessed to work in an area that is very, very bipartisan. I think this belief, this underlying belief that America should lead the world in technological innovation, and we should be the home for the next great discoveries, whether that's through better spending of government resources through our R&D capacity or creating regulations to encourage innovation. This is something that tends to not necessarily fall on partisan lines. So I think we see it as a place where if we're looking for opportunities to come together and find bills that can pass both houses, I think things that fall in the broader innovation category are a great place to start.
Let me correct something too before we get any further. I actually wasn't in the Congress in '96, so I don't want anybody later saying Mayor Blunt was contending to have been part of something he wasn't part of. But I was on the Commerce Committee a couple of years later when we did the update of that act.
Yes, yes.
And in the update, nothing that had mattered 5 years before mattered much. And I was still there 5 years later when we did the second update, and all the things we fought about the first time didn't matter much. I think one of the rules that the Congress particularly should have here is do no harm. The odds in technology that the Congress is actually going to solve a problem while it's still a problem is, I think it's almost zero. The odds that the effort to solve a problem will create obstacles for future opportunities are probably a lot greater. And we need to always be thinking about that do no harm as we think about a future that is so rapidly approaching, so quickly out there and hard to anticipate. And so we want to be careful about that as well. And those 3 telecom bills in the mid 90s to the late 90s would be a great case study to go back. I remember in the first one I was part of, the Commerce Committee kind of divided up into you were an RBOC or a non-RBOC, and we kind of split it almost, not on partisan lines, but almost evenly in those fights. I guarantee you 2 years later, none of that mattered. The regional bells didn't largely exist anymore, for instance, and that had been a defining time setter and time user in that telecom bill. So it's a good example of how the Congress wants to be sure that what we're doing is actually trying to create an open door for the future and maybe some guide rails, but don't close those doors we need to quickly get through.
We appreciate that. We speak a lot about regulatory humility and as far as, providing guideposts, but not, holding back innovation. You spoke a little bit about infrastructure, and the way we talk about it is smart cities. Like, we're talking about mobility. It's not just roads and bridges. It's like, how do you get someone from point A to point B with the most efficient way possible? That could be self-driving vehicles. That could be any number of modes of transportation. But central to that is 5G. And one of the things that we all understand is that U.S. is in heavy competition globally for 5G, and I know that's something that the White House is focused on and the Congress is focused on. So, Michael, can you speak a little bit kind of at how the administration is trying to position industry and the country for 5G?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, leadership in 5G has been a priority for us for quite some time. I think one of our early actions we took was a presidential memorandum that President Trump signed in order to open up federal lands to sightings. As you know, one of the biggest challenges with 5G is going to be this sighting challenge, where suddenly we're moving away from these large-scale cell towers to a lot smaller receivers. So that was one, but I think we really turbocharged the effort with an event we held at the White House a couple months ago on 5G leadership in the world, and convened a lot of the stakeholders in the area to hear from the agencies that matter most in this space. Pi was there, Rettel was there, and the whole team kind of came together to kind of share what the administration was doing. Subsequently to that, President Trump signed another presidential memorandum directing Commerce to formulate a national strategy for spectrum with a focus on ensuring that we maintain 5G leadership. And the FCC, independent from us, has taken a number of actions, moving ahead with some rules around shot clocking and how we can really get the deployments to move forward. So we continue to track that. It's something that we really think is important. We even hosted an event earlier today with some senior executives, and that was one of our key messages. How ensuring 5G leadership is something that we can't take our eye off of.
Yes, big money at the White House. We'll get to that.
Senator. The other thing we need to think about there too is because of the posting of 5G, the way the 5G works, are we going to leave rural communities further behind? And they are, rural broadband, a really critical goal for me, for many people on the Commerce Committee, I think for the FCC, and 5G makes that in some ways even more complicated. So looking at maybe the mid-band levels where you have a little more distance, maybe not quite the maximum 5G speed, I think we have to be really thoughtful here, because if we think about the information infrastructure in the right way, we can really expand the people's capacity to live where they want to live, maybe closer where they can take care of their somebody in their family that needs taken care of, but still be an active and equally competitive part of an economy that's more and more information focused.
No, absolutely. And we think about rural broadband quite a bit. I know Congress very generously appropriated $600 million to the Department of Agriculture to help with this rural broadband deployment, and we're thinking very carefully about kind of the best ways to do that and most effectively be able to kind of connect the most people. So big important thing for us.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we believe is that innovation is not defined by the coast, and if you have connectivity, the next great startup, the next great unicorn could be in Missouri. So making sure that access is there is critical and essential. And we would definitely say that has to be part of infrastructure, making sure that broadband is throughout. So as we think about kind of what's next, one of the things we appreciate with the dialogue that we have with the White House and with Congress is kind of taking a step to see, what's next. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Those are things that have been part of tech for a while, but now it's going to a different level. You think about quantum computing, and the White House is already thinking about these things, and how do we have a strategy around it? Can you speak a little bit to kind of what you all are doing on AI and quantum computing particularly?
Yeah, I think with both of those, we kind of see the vision around ensuring leadership in these particular emerging technologies kind of falls in a three-pronged approach. First and foremost, we have to ensure R&D leadership, and I think we're blessed with a very, very unique ecosystem in the U.S. that's one part private sector, one part academia, and one part federal government, all working in tandem. And we spend a lot of time at the White House thinking about how we can make sure that the federal government's contribution to that ecosystem is maximized, whether or not the dollars spent at NSF, at DARPA, DOE Science, and all other great agencies are working together in a way that's collaborative and there isn't sort of duplicative efforts. So that's number one. Number two is everything around workforce. This idea that you need the people to actually do and make the incredible discoveries going forward. So we see it as you need to create the actual talent pipeline that's going to ensure that we again are the leaders in making those discoveries, and we've done quite a bit of effort around our STEM education initiatives. And the third piece is around removing barriers to innovation in these particular fields. As you know, one of the biggest White House's priority has been this deregulatory emphasis, but taking a step back and thinking about it in the context of technology is something that I spend most of my time on. And for us, as we're constantly asking people in the tech community, how is it the government is in the way of your particular technology being commercialized or making a breakthrough? And we see it with autonomous vehicles, we see it with drones, we see it in a lot of spaces. And as we shape agendas for whether it's AI or quantum, those are kind of the three things we look at: R&D, workforce, and dereg.
And Senator, one of the things that's particularly important for the tech community generally, but for the broader economy, is how do we build that next workforce? There's a lot of focus on K through 12. Education is important, but as you look at those who are transitioning to new roles, how do we make sure they get the training? One of the things that we've been very pleased about is the discussion around apprenticeship. So how should we be thinking about it, and how does that kind of play into your priorities?
Well, I chair the Appropriating Committee for Labor and Education and Health and Human Services, and apprenticeships is one of the areas where I'm for it. Senator Murray, the lead Democrat on that committee, is a big advocate of apprenticeships. So's Secretary Acosta, and most importantly, and who has to sign the bill, so is the President. But how can we find new ways that are more focused on not just getting a certificate, but actually getting a job?
Exactly.
How can we find new ways where we prepare differently? Career and technical education's had a big increase in funding and focus just in the last 2 or 3 years. We've gone back to the year-round Pell Grant. And why does that matter? Why that matters is if you're a first-time attender in your family, or you're an adult returning to school, if you're responsible for your own education, the biggest single thing you can do to add to the likelihood that you'll graduate is just keep going. Get that done when you can. If you've got a pattern that's working, keep it in place. And so for people who find themselves needing to get back into education to get a skill level that they didn't have before, being able to do that year-round matters. It really matters to when you're talking with employers who really don't understand how you could have 2 semesters of Pell Grants that people could use to get ready for their workplace, and then suddenly you come to the summer and say, well, we really can't provide any more assistance to these students until next fall. So things like that are really making a difference, and at some point, research generally, what the government can do to encourage research in healthcare and agriculture and other places that can create a backdrop of information that we can be more competitive, because we have that, and almost always in some kind of partnership that's public and private before those research dollars are finally spent and begin to produce a result.
And I know that the White House recently came out with their STEM strategic plan, which focuses a lot on apprenticeships and different ways of kind of creating new rungs on the ladder for kind of upward mobility within the economy, and with a particular focus on diversity and making sure that we have access to the best talent that the country has to offer. So what's next with that strategic plan?
Yes, we're very excited to launch it at an event at the White House on Tuesday. As you know, COMPETES Act requires a 5-year strategic plan every year to be delivered delivered to Congress. This was our first revisioning since the first plan 5 years ago. And I think in this go-around, as you said, there was this really emphasis and reminder on the workforce component. STEM education is very important to create the next great scientists who will graduate from the MITs and Princetons of the world. But at the same token, I mean, STEM education is something that everyone at all skill levels will need to have to succeed in America's workforce. I was just at a dinner a few weeks ago with an executive from BMW talking about a new facility that they built in South Carolina, my home state, and he was sort of describing the type of work that people in their new car plant are doing, and this is actual technical work. These are people behind very sophisticated machines that are utilizing computers. They're not, bending steel or pouring iron or anything. And I think, being able to kind of share this kind of educational opportunity with a diverse set of Americans is what's ultimately important. And for us, it's preparing the American worker for the jobs of the future. And I think that's a theme that you see kind of throughout that strategy.
We couldn't agree more.
I think you could also see Senator Brown and I a couple of years ago got a bill passed in advanced manufacturing, which creates a matrix where more than one employer in combination with at least one academic institution makes all of that work in ways that we hadn't thought of before. I know I talked to some businesses that were German-based, and they wanted to grow in America, but that model that I just described was very much already in existence, and they'd figured out how to use it. We didn't have anything quite like that to bring to the table, but those kinds of new collaborative efforts, again, where you combine education with actual workforce training, and maybe workforce training between two similar but different companies, all produces a result that we have not previously been able to produce exactly that way.
Senator, I want to talk a little bit more about your work on the Commerce Committee. You've been very successful, particularly when it comes to providing some rules of the road, no pun intended, for self-driving vehicles.
Right.
What do you think the status? You all have done incredible work, and we only have a couple more weeks left in Congress.
Well, I was asked about that today. I think, frankly, we had a stronger head of steam on that until a couple of accidents occurred last year, and middle of the election year, those occur. A lot of people that were willing to step forward legislatively step back a little bit, but clearly this is something we need to do, and we need to do it in a way that there's a framework to do it in. Gary Peters from Michigan and I sponsored that legislation. We're going to get there. I'm not sure we can get this done the way we'd want to before the end of this year, but I think it's clearly understood that this is going to happen, and it needs to happen with some set of preemptive rulemaking so that you don't have 50 different structures or 53 different structures develop as to how you'll develop and maybe even use these vehicles as they're being developed. So we're going to work hard on that, and occasionally my wife tells our youngest son that you'll probably be explaining to your kids before you would imagine possible. Well, we used to actually have a car that you would get behind the steering wheel and drive rather than a vehicle that would just show up when you needed it and take you where you needed to go.
It's amazing how things change.
It's hard to tell a 14-year-old that too,
Well,
by the
true.
way.
I mean, I remember being 16 and so eager to get a driver's license because that was my way out, like my ticket out. But now kids have, Uber and all these ride-sharing services. Right. Another thing that's going to be a key topic on your committee this upcoming year is privacy. And if you kind of think of, what does the future for American privacy policy look like? You've got, what's happened in California with their new privacy law, Europe's approach with GDPR, and kind of, between that, or wouldn't say between that, but somewhere within that structure, we need to find our way on how do we kind of move forward with a privacy policy in the United States that appreciate that so much innovation comes from data, and data-driven innovation overall has immense benefits. So how do we kind of go forward on privacy policy? Your committee is going to have a central role in that.
It does. We've had a fairly hard time. In fact, we've had a really hard time coming up with some new nationwide rules on data protection. Senator Carper and I have worked on that, and we have worked on that for at least 5 years now. Every time there is a significant data breach, we both think maybe this is the moment when we can move through and get over the obstacles so you can just protect data. I think it gets even harder, but again, it gets harder, but it gets more important that we don't have multiple rules in our own country of how we deal with data. I think in terms of how people use data, or how Americans and people all over the world have willingly given up the information they give up for other free services they get in return, I'm not sure everybody quite understood that that was the economic mix that made that all possible, and how we deal with that. And then the other issue that maybe either in the Intel committee that I'm on, or the committee that deals with elections that I'm on, the Rules Committee, is who should have responsibility for the accuracy of information that's out there. That's even harder than having, I think, a structure for privacy of your information, or how much ownership you really have. And by the way, most of the ownership we've all willingly given away every time we press agree. Those are three big issues: data security, privacy, and then somebody being willing or not to verify that the information that's out there is accurate information.
Well, Michael, you all had a big meeting at the White House today. I'm sure this may have been one of the issues that came up. So for those that may not be aware, there was a number of tech CEOs at the White House today to talk about some of kind of what's next in tech and kind of continuing the dialogue with the administration.
Yeah, absolutely. Our event today was centered around a focus on American leadership in industries of the future. And the four that we have identified and we've been working towards through national strategies and other projects over the last year and a half are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G, and advanced manufacturing. And as we build each of those strategies that I mentioned before, there's a high emphasis on sort of research and development, on workforce, and on this sort of removing barriers concept. But to really achieve leadership in these spaces, I mean, we really want to make a greater effort to kind of bring this together under one sort of larger initiative. And we believe that American leadership in these industries of the future is absolutely critical, especially as some of our adversaries are making very public and very large investments in a lot of these spaces. And the group we brought together, I think, was fantastic. I mean, we had senior executives with CEOs from Google, from Microsoft, from IBM. We also had Steve Schwartzman from Blackstone. We had two university presidents from MIT and from Carnegie Mellon. And we even had Henry Kissinger there, who has a very interesting take and has been focused a lot on artificial intelligence over the past few months. But for us, I mean, this is the collective group that needs to come together to think about how we can achieve this. And again, what role can the federal government play in this larger and unique R&D ecosystem the United States has? So this was a great listening session for us, and we've got a lot of great ideas on the table, and it certainly is just the beginning of a much longer conversation that I think everyone at the White House is thrilled about. The president stopped by, saw the group, and I think we're all very excited for what's to come.
And the possibilities of innovation are endless. And one of the things, you know, as we kind of approach 2019, from your vantage point, Senator, what are you most optimistic about from your vantage point when it comes to innovation and what's possible?
Well, I think we're continuing to see great results. I mentioned before in research, you know, in the NIH research, that we've really made a significant, aggressive commitment to a 30% increase in research dollars for NIH in the last few years. And most of that was by combining or eliminating programs that weren't working very well. This is largely done without any new money, just a new priority. And you know, what we've seen in immunotherapy 5 years ago, that was still very much on the research table. Now it's very much in the list of here's what we're doing to fight cancer as one of the principal tools available. What needs to happen with cancer, with Alzheimer's. Not only do you have a great individual cost, and frankly, in most countries, including ours, the great taxpayer cost of illness, but you also have the innovative opportunity if you become the country that figures out how to solve these problems in a better way. You've also got the economic things that go with that. In ag research, something the federal government's been involved in since 1862, when the ag department was created. In ag research, world food demand is going to double by about 2050. And we're naturally good at this. We have access to markets in ways that nobody else could. But you're going to do that largely with fewer inputs on the same amount of land and have to be the most competitive. And so that means how does science play an important part in that as well. And there's a place where in both of those instances, I think the government component is not only an important component, but is frankly a component that we're just better at adding that to it than anybody else is, and we don't want to lose that advantage we've got.
Michael, from your vantage point, what are you most optimistic about?
No,
innovation-wise?
I totally agree with you, Senator. I think for us, really doubling down on this Industries of the Future idea, I cannot stress enough how much we think about, our place in the world in achieving leadership and scale in these particular areas. A lot of these, especially things like quantum, are sort of long-dated technological issues that are going to take many, many decades to play out, and there's a very, very important role for the federal government to play in really doing the necessary basic research that the private sector is not necessarily incentivized yet to do. So I'm enthused for that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, any last words before we wrap up?
Got to wrap up.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again to the Business Roundtable for pulling together such a great group of folks to talk about the future of innovation. And have a great afternoon.